Germany is the second most important arms supplier to Israel after the United States. The German government distinguishes between classic weapons of war and other defense equipment, and it argues that it only supplies defensive weapons to Israel and always checks their use. But a human rights organization based in Berlin is calling for a complete stop to the supply of weapons of war to Israel by Germany, and has sued the German government in a Berlin court, also on behalf of 5 Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. Mr. Schwarz, what exactly do you accuse the federal government of Germany of legally in your lawsuit?
So we sue the German government to stop the export of German weapons of war to Israel, because we have reasonable grounds to believe that with these kind of weapons, Israel is committing crimes against civilians in Gaza, crimes consisting of war crimes and crimes against humanity, as recently confirmed by the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. And in doing so, the German government is violating its international obligations on arms trade and its own national obligations.
Now, Nicaragua filed a lawsuit, an international lawsuit against Germany earlier this year for supplying arms to Israel. And the German representatives there argued that Germany supplies defensive weapons and that their use is being monitored. And the ECCHR judges, in their decision in May, then agreed that military support for Israel by Germany has declined sharply since the beginning of the Gaza war. And they also did not order any provisional measures for Germany to stop its weapons exports to Israel. So what makes you confident that you will manage to achieve just that?
So the German representative in the Nicaragua case also mentioned that they delivered anti-tank weapons, so-called bazookas. And for example, these kind of bazookas, we have knowledge and we have incidents that these kind of weapons are used in Gaza. And as well, we have knowledge of ammunition which shall or is being delivered to Israel, which also we have reasonable grounds to believe that this kind of ammunition is used in Gaza actually, and therefore is used for the commission of war crimes.
Now, the Israeli army leadership, of course, has repeatedly said that the number of civilians killed in the fight in Gaza is low compared to other battles in urban areas, such as the expulsion of the Islamic State in Mosul in Iraq, for example. And of course, international law does also provide for the right of self-defense. So what is your objection to Israel that says it is defending itself after the 7th of October terrorist attacks on its territory?
So we do not challenge Israel's right of self-defense. Israel has its inherent right of self-defense, but the difference we always have to make in international law is the difference between the right to self-defense and to comply with international humanitarian law, which are the laws in war, finally. And we have a lot of incidents that Israel is violating these rules. For example, direct attacks on civilian population, or the disproportional attacks of civilian objects and civilian population. That means we do not challenge self-defense, but within self-defense, Israel has to respect humanitarian law, which from our point of view, it does.
And what kind of evidence do you have that German arms are being used in what you say could be potential war crimes? What is the evidence that you're working with?
So we did and got a lot of open source investigations concerning videos, witness statements, photographs, and other documents. As well, we used international reports from the UN, from Human Rights Watch and other organizations that really have a huge number of incidents. As well, we see online, for example, on social media, we see incidents and evidence delivered by members of the IDF themselves by showing they are destroying, for example, civilian objects. And these are acts that presumably can constitute war crimes.
And which German weapons are we talking about here?
We are talking, as already mentioned, of anti-tank weapons. We are talking of ammunition, but we are not only talking about these direct weapons of war. We are also talking about deliveries of engines of tanks, for example, which are delivered from Germany to Israel.
Okay. Now, your lawsuit refers to the 2% of weapons deliveries that Germany, the German government, classifies as classic weapons of war. What about the other 98%?
Yeah, the problem really is that German law distinguishes between weapons of war and the other parts, which means components of weapons of war. And so far, we only attacked or challenged with our lawsuit this 2%. Why? Because we think that these weapons of war are most likely to being used to commit war crimes in Gaza. But now we plan also to file a second lawsuit concerning the other 98% of weapons, which refers to another jurisdiction here in Germany. It won't be filed to the federal court in Berlin, it will be filed to the administrative court in Frankfurt.
And what have you heard from the court in Berlin?
So far, the trial is still pending, and we are now awaiting the decision of the court. And very likely it will be at the beginning of June, we hope. If they will stop these kind of weapons of war, there is no other legal measure required. And if they won't stop, of course, we have to appeal this judgment. And we will.
And what knowledge do you have? Has Germany continued to supply weapons of war to Israel?
From our knowledge so far, what the German government said during the trial and what they mentioned at the ECCHR hearings in The Hague, from our knowledge so far they do not deliver any more weapons of war. But maybe it's only a question of time until they will do again.
Now, should German politicians at some point expect to be held accountable?
Actually, it's further a question of international law obligations by the German government. By supplying weapons of war to Israel, which are used to commit war crimes, this is not a question of international criminal liability of individual persons. So what we are doing actually is further relying on international and state responsibility, not on individual criminal responsibility. This is a question which refers further to direct attacks which are being committed on the ground by soldiers or by members of the Hamas. Those persons should be addressed by international criminal law, which is also possible to do it in Germany.
And we've talked about the ICJ now. What about the ICC? We know that the chief prosecutor has come forward and has requested an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, but of course Israel does not recognize the ICC. So how can potential war crimes in Gaza committed by the Netanyahu government be prosecuted under criminal law?
So it is not required that Israel is a member of the International Criminal Court for being prosecuted. The question is that the crime scene is Gaza, and Gaza is part of Palestine, and Palestine is a member of the International Criminal Court, and therefore the court has jurisdiction to prosecute crimes committed in the Gaza Strip. And that's the reason why it's completely legally and in accordance to the Rome Statute that the ICC actually can prosecute members of the Israeli government and members of the Hamas organization. And now the question is that every arrest warrant, as recently mentioned, has to be respected by all the member states of the Rome Statute, including Germany.
No, but of course the German government has always argued that the security of the Israeli state itself is a very big founding principle, essentially, of modern-day German foreign politics. And there has been a discussion after the chief prosecutor came forward with his request about the question, would Germany then arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if the ICC judges actually follow the chief prosecutor's request? What do you think, in your experience as a lawyer, what will the German government do you think?
I would say, first of all, as a state being governed by the rule of law, of course, the legal situation is quite clear. Germany is obliged to respect the Rome Statute, which is its member of, and therefore it has to really respect every arrest warrant which is filed by the International Criminal Court. I think that does not conflict with the so-called state doctrine, because state doctrine is a political concept. And here we are talking of legal concepts. And I think the most important is to respect the rule of law and to respect the promise in this law and in our constitution. And we have an international law-friendly constitution in Germany. And this means that we can't override these rules by political concepts like the state doctrine. I think this is what counts, actually.
Alexander Schwarz, thank you very much.
Pleasure.